I got this.
Oh fuck! Come on!
Giga.
Come on, AK! Just burn it!
TPS raise.
Oh my god!
Crit the Bootshine!
What's up, guys? It's 5 o'clock. We're gonna get started. Just pulled my coffee out. You guys like that opening? Only the finest production value here. Welcome to the episode 0/pilot episode of something I've been wanting to do for a long time. My name is Layla. If you're unfamiliar with me, I've been playing Final Fantasy since 2.0. Been raiding in it for just as long. Crit the Bootshine is going to be a sort of raiding-focused podcast that I'm starting. Over the last, I'd say, 2 to 3 years, I've found that I really enjoy making content where, we analyze raid videos or things under that umbrella. And a lot of times I go really over the top in making my content too long, and a lot of people have just come up to me and said you should really just consider doing podcasts if you really enjoy talking for that long. So I think that they would be a better medium for that kind of content. And I've never disagreed. I've always agreed, but I've never actually wanted to pull the trigger and start one. But this week, I got a little daring, and I decided, you know what? I want to do it. Let's do it. So I just pulled the trigger, and here we are. So this will be episode 0. 0 because it's probably not, because it's a little bit short notice, it's probably not at the quality of what I would want an episode 1 to be. So we can consider this sort of a pilot/test run for future episodes. But welcome. Thank you for showing up. Today's topic is going to be Ultimate. It's very topical right now. We just got confirmation in the last live letter of what our Ultimate encounter is going to be in 4.3. So we're going to be looking ahead to that, but we're also going to be looking back to the only other Ultimate encounter we've had in UCOB, and we're going to be analyzing some of the things that worked well and maybe didn't work so well with that in an effort to decide what we want to see going forward in 4.3. But before we can get into any of that, we need to do a little bit of preface. I mentioned before, my name is Layla. I've been raiding hardcore for, I'd say, about 3 years now. Before that, I was fairly casual in the game, so I've dabbled in both spectrums of raiding in the game. So while I may be a little bit more biased to the hardcore side of perspectives, I do feel that I can probably relate to some of the more mid-core perspectives when they're looking at content like Ultimate. So I'm going to try to sort of appease both perspectives today. At least do my best. It'll be maybe a bit much of a task, but I'll do my best. So Ultimate is their 3rd difficulty tier that they have added to the game, but it wasn't always there, and I think it's important that we sort of look at how Ultimate came to be. Damn Jump was casual. Damn Jump is my 2.0 static, and I think Damn Jump rated 2 to 3 days a week for 4 hours a night. So compared to what I'm used to doing these days, it's pretty casual. But yeah, we're just getting started, guys. So you guys who are just showing up now, you haven't missed anything. I want to talk a little bit about how Ultimate came to be, and to do that, we're going to have to go back in time, all the way back to, honestly, 2.4. So 2.4 was the FFXIV patch. I'm going to turn the music down just a little bit for myself. 2.4 was the FFXIV patch, and This is a significant patch in the history of Final Fantasy raiding because this was the final single difficulty tier raid that Square Enix produced for us. FCOB was a tier that was cleared relatively quick compared to the previous iterations of the Coil raids. I believe World First happened in 5 days and World Second was in 6 days. So both World First and Second happened week 1, which was kind of unheard of before that. You know, you had Turn 5 go down in over a month and a half, and then you had maybe even upwards of 2 months with how long Twintani was closed. And then you had Nail last until, I want to say, the end of the second week. I believe that's accurate. I don't think World First used weapons. I hope I'm not wrong, but I think it was the end of the second week that Turn 9 went down. So a final boss going down in 5 to 6 days was you know, it sort of marked a downward trend for the difficulty in rating, in progression rating. So Turn 9 did use weapons. Okay, well we'll say 2+ weeks. We'll say 2+ weeks for Turn 9. But I get that's even more evidence that FCOB is such a stark shift in how things happened. As a result, there was not necessarily negativity outpouring after the tier, but there was definitely a conversation, you know, within the raiding community of the tiers are getting easier and easier and easier. We really wanted something to get harder and harder and harder, and Square Enix listened to that, and as a result, when Heavensward launched with 3.0, they announced that they were going to add the new difficulty Savage to raiding. And this was in response to some of the more high-end player base wanting a more difficult challenge than what was currently being offered in 2.4 and 2.5. And this was a huge shift in the rating history of the game. There's probably like 3 to 4 critical points in the history of rating in Final Fantasy XIV, and this is definitely one of them. In 3.0, they released Gordius Savage. They released Gordius and Gordius Savage. Gordius normal mode became content that was much easier than people were used to with the normal tier raids. You clear it in a pug blind in your first go. You clear it in under 2 hours. So it's, you know, if you were familiar with WoW back then, everyone was calling it was the LFR mode of raiding. And then you had your Savage mode, Gordius, which was catered to the people who want to raid for more than just the story. People who want to raid to challenge themselves and then be rewarded with high item level equipment for that. So this sort of separation of the two of the rating demographics, not the only 2 rating demographics, but the separation of 2 of the rating demographics is critical in what we're about to talk about today. So what happened with Gordius, I'll cut to the end of it. What happened with Gordius was it was a very polarizing raid tier where Square Enix made the content so difficult that it really only catered and pandered to 1% of the player base, the 1% that could be willing to put forth 500 to 800 pulls on a boss, the people who did it for the challenge, the people who enjoyed the challenge more than just the carrot at the end of the stick. So what ended up happening after Gordius is you had a lot of people lose interest in raiding because not everyone there are more demographics than just the people who want to do the story and the people who wanted to raid for the sake of raiding. And there was a group of people in the latter demographic that were more or less lost after Gordius. You had, I'd say, probably 80% of that demographic was lost. They're the people who didn't want to put forth 800 pulls to kill a boss, but also didn't want to just raid for story. They wanted something in between, and what they really wanted was they wanted Final Coil. Final Coil was one of the most popular raids in terms of mass reception. It was, during its farm period where they removed the lockout, it was probably some of the most active sort of farm patches, for lack of a better word. It's the period of time in which the raiding community was the most active in doing pugs, in doing trap runs and stuff, as people call them. It was just very active, and that's important because what ends up happening later on, we go through Heaven's Word, and they sort of try to repair the damage they did in Gordius with Midas, and then finally with Creator, they really turn things up. What happened with Midas is they tried to reel some of that player base back that they lost, and they made things a little bit easier than Gordius, but it was still very mechanically taxing. So maybe you didn't need the item level and gear stacking that you did to clear back as you did in Gordius, but you still needed the hundreds of pulls to master mechanics and strategies, and that was still a little bit too much for that lost demographic. So we aren't quite there yet with Midas. 6 months later, you have Creator, which was the final tier of Heaven's Word, and they finally just say, look, the largest portions of our player base are unhappy with our raid design, and it's a very minor amount of people that are enjoying the difficulty of our raids. So what we're going to do is we're going to still retain our multi-difficulty system. We're going to have our story mode normals, and then we're still going to have our savage modes, but we're going to make the savage modes accessible to all demographics. We're going to, if you put in 10 hours a week, if you put in 8 hours a week, you're going to be able to clear this content, and you're going to be able to do it at a pace that's enjoyable, at a pace that warrants you giving us a subscription fee every month, and you're going to be able to enjoy it with your friends. And there's not going to be any exclusion between what jobs your friends can play. We're going to tune it in a way that it's accessible and fun for everyone. And that is what Creator was. Creator was a tier that was killed on the, I guess you could call it the very end of the second day, which really just meant killed before the second sleep cycle. You can't really call things days or nights in progression rating. It's how many times have you slept since you killed it? So it was killed, I think, before the second sleep cycle by Angered, and then we killed it, I think, 2 hours later, and then you had a number of other kills start flooding in throughout that day, as I recall. Or if not that day, then maybe the next day. But kills were happening very fast, and while they tried to sort of emulate the Final Coil atmosphere of enjoyment for players, what they probably didn't consider is some of the balance changes they made. No pun intended, by the way, if you caught that. And B, the fact that I believe Creator was the first tier that actually utilized the cooldown reset. I could be wrong. I hope I'm not wrong. My memory is a little bit hazy with that. But I believe Midas was the last tier that we actually had to wait for cooldowns after pulls. And the cooldown reset drastically reduced progression time. It can't be understated. So those things combined produced a tier that was maybe even a little bit more difficult than Final Coil, but still cleared faster than Final Coil. So while they were able to successfully reel back in their lost demographic, they still have an issue of the, albeit small, player base. The hardcore player base is left unsatisfied. And what happened between Creator and leading up to Stormblood is you had a lot of the hardcore players sort of, I would say dropping off. I'd say spending a little bit less time playing the game, finding other things to challenge themselves with. They were adding win conditions and stuff to content that already existed in the game, you know, be it doing a speed kill, or doing things with really low item level to make it challenging. So Square Enix had to make a decision. Did they like how Creator unfolded? Was it good for the health of the rating community in their game? And shortly before Stormblood, we got their opinion on that, because in one of the announcements before Stormblood, they started hinting at a potential third difficulty being added to rating. And this caused a huge spark of interest in the rating community. Everyone was like, "Oh my God, they're kicking it up a notch. They're actually catering to the 1% now. That's remarkable." And then you have, you know, the people on the other side of the spectrum who are like, "Oh, well, what does this mean for Savage? Maybe this just means that Savage is going to become a complete joke, and the new difficulty is just going to be akin to what we already have." What they end up doing is they end up announcing their ultimate difficulty, and this is what our show is about today. Ultimate is unique to Stormblood. It's just, we've only had it in Stormblood so far, and what Ultimate is, this for the record, I'm going to preface this part of the show by saying that, in my opinion, in order to accomplish everything that Square Enix wants to accomplish, this is more or less the best thing they could have done. I've been following along with their design choices since the beginning of Realm Reborn, even back in 1.0, and actually when it was a different development team. And of their design choices, this is the one that I will praise them the most for, because this hits all the right notes. What they've done with Ultimate is they've found a way to appease the 1% that wants to be challenged at an extremely difficult and taxing environment. And they found a way to do that really doesn't cost them many resources. And that's always been the big concern, right? Is, well, they don't want to commit too many resources to such a small demographic. That's why we've never gotten the difficult content that we wanted to, in addition to the stuff before. What they do with Ultimate is they take a fight that already exists in the game, they speed it up about 4x plus, and then they change some of the mechanics, not too many, but it appears that they change some of the mechanics that already exist and just put them all together in one big pot and stir it up and then serve you a fight. They pour it all into your bowl and they serve you a hot fight. And that's what an Ultimate encounter is. Ultimate is different from other difficulty tiers because of its pacing and because of the number of concurrent mechanics you have to deal with at once. And they've managed to create content that is not resource intensive for them because all of these assets already exist in the game. With small exceptions, and I'll get to this part. I'll get to that part in a minute because that's something that sort of caught us off guard. So looking at Stormblood now, we're in a situation where we have 3 difficulty tiers. We have a normal mode that's akin to a story mode. We have a savage mode that's sort of appealing to the final coil audience, the people who just want to raid bosses that don't fall over with 0 teamwork. You do still need teamwork in Savage, albeit the things are not tuned very difficult. And then you have your really super try-hard difficulty tier that people who want to do nothing other than challenge themselves for the sake of challenging themselves. Ultimate is for you. So I think, personally speaking, the 3 difficulty tier system they set up, and I used to be a critic of this when they first announced the 3 difficulty tier, because I've seen it in other MMOs. I was a little bit skeptical. I was a little bit worried how it was going to unfold. But the fact that they've made Ultimate purely reward, I would say purely reward cosmetics. The reward for Ultimate is not so game-breakingly different than the reward for Savage that it doesn't leave the other player base feeling like they're left out too much. There are some really entitled people out there, but they'll just have to deal with it. The one thing that I said that caught us off guard earlier, like back before Stormblood released, because we were sort of expecting that anything they do is they're going to do without committing too many resources to it because it's such a small demographic that they're doing this content for. When we actually started progressing Ultimate Coil, Unending Coil of Bahamut, which was their first Ultimate tier released in 4.1, to everyone's shock, they actually added entirely new Ultimate specific assets to the fight, and that was just icing on the cake for everybody. We were all, completely surprised that there was, assets unique to Ultimate development time that went into something that so few members of the player base are going to actually take part in and experience. And so we were extremely appreciative of that. And I think that that goes to show you that Square Enix, at its core, we can criticize them for many things, but one of the things we can't criticize them for is they do really care about the theme of their product, I want to say. Releasing a fight that's just a reskinned Bahamut is not enough of a quality product for them. I imagine at some point during the development process they were like, you know what, this fight, while Bahamut is really hard and difficult, it's lacking something visually that says that I am the ultimate encounter in this game. And what they did was they added an entire new form to Bahamut that doesn't exist anywhere else in the game in Gold Bahamut, and gave it its own BGM that only exists in I think 1 or 2 cutscenes. So they didn't really have to reuse that, but they remastered it and remixed it a little bit, and that was just really cool to see. So definitely huge marks for Square Enix in that regard. Can you turn your mic volume up a little? I unfortunately can't. I did say I'll talk about this after we start the show. So before we go any bit further into the ultimate topic, I will address what I said I was going to address earlier. So one of the reasons this is episode 0 and not episode 1 is because unfortunately some of the audio qualities of this episode are not up to par for what I would want to call an episode 1. Unfortunately, my sound card died, and I'm hooked up to onboard audio right now, and this is the best my microphone can do. So what I've had to do is just lower the background music as much as I can and just put myself on max. And if you guys need to raise me up as much as you can, please do. But this is what we're stuck with today. I apologize. I'm doing my best to speak as loudly as I can for you guys. Okay, so I also mentioned I do have some show notes for today. I did want to sort of start out with a bit of a preface on the history of Ultimate before we got into anything. Some of the topics we're going to hit on today are, I want to look back at Unending Coil, since that's the only other sample we have of Ultimate. Talk about some things that went right, some things that went wrong. Some of the things that we might want to see in Ultimate Weapon, which is our upcoming encounter in 4.3. And in addition to that, I want to discuss whether or not Ultimate Weapon was the right pick for an Ultimate encounter. Leading up to the live letter, it was just massive speculations about what the encounter they choose is going to be. I think that, we'll get into that later. I won't say my opinion on it yet. And then outside of that, at the end of the show, what we're going to do is I've been collecting questions, and I'll link it in chat. I think Moobot should be automatically linking it for you guys. Yeah, Moobot's spamming you guys. I apologize. If you guys have any questions regarding anything really raid related, please leave them on the link the Moobot's dropping. And I will pick my favorites toward the end of the show and go through some of them that I think would make good discussion pieces. So now that we've got accustomed to how things are going to go, let's start getting into it. And like I mentioned earlier, I said this before we started the stream, definitely, if you guys are familiar with my previous content that I do on stream, I really encourage chat interaction. So if you guys have comments or questions or things you want to contribute to the discussion, let me know in chat, and I'll do my best to catch it as we're going along. It makes this a lot more fun for me. This is a solo podcast, so as much chat interaction as I can get, it makes it a lot more fun for me, and I think it just promotes a more natural environment, discussion environment. So let's get into some of the UCOB stuff. So UCOB, like we mentioned, was the first Ultimate encounter that they released they released it in 4.1. And what's special about UCOB is that the Bahamut encounter is so central to Final Fantasy XIV that the amount of hype that surrounded it, the choice that they made in choosing Bahamut was huge for their first Ultimate tier. They started out Ultimate with a massive bang. Ultimate is iconic. Not Ultimate. Bahamut is iconic to not only the Final Fantasy franchise, but also to Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy 1.0 was literally destroyed by Bahamut, and the hype that went into the coils in 2.x leading up to the Bahamut encounter itself was massive, and it's definitely some of the player base's most nostalgic, some of the moments and experiences the player base is most nostalgic for. So choosing Bahamut as their first Ultimate encounter was an extremely good choice. A few of us were worried that it might have been a little bit premature, because I myself included was worried, well, how in the world are they going to top this, you know? How in the world are they going to top an Ultimate Bahamut when Bahamut is so game defining? And I think that first of all, I think that there is room for topping it, and I'll get into some of that in a little bit, but I want to look at the actual encounter itself and sort of talk about, for people who may be unfamiliar with it, what went well and what didn't quite work so well. So let's first talk about what made Bahamut actually Ultimate. Bahamut starts out with not Bahamut himself, but actually you fight the previous two final bosses of the first coil and second coil in Twintania and Nail, and you fight them at a level of difficulty that is massively increased from their previous iterations. You have mechanics that are happening at 5 times the pace they were happening in coil, and much more punishing, in my opinion. And this was sort of I'd say Twintania, the first phase of Ultimate Coil is Twintania, and I'd say Twintania is really your introduction to Ultimate, because right out of the gate you're hit with 3 mechanics rapid fire, and it sets up the tone for how the fight is going to go. And I think that when it came to the pacing of the fight, that's what I want to see in an Ultimate encounter. People sort of critique Final Fantasy XIV. They've critiqued it over the years in being kind of one of the slower MMOs. We have 2.5 second GCD, LOL, and obviously we have OGCDs and stuff in between that. But to the average player on the outside looking in, Final Fantasy XIV looks like a slower MMO than some of the other MMOs in the market. We live in an age where action RPG MMOs are really popular. Games like Terra, Blade and Soul. Those are the really only 2 that I've ever played, so those are the only ones I can reference. But those types of games started increasing in popularity. And I think that what they managed to do with Ultimate, because of the pacing of mechanics, they somehow managed to turn a, for all intents and purposes, slow game into an extremely fast-paced environment. Your GCDs aside, the decision making and the movement you have to do to navigate UCOB mechanics are much faster than most MMOs that I've played in the market. And I think that this is the type of pacing that I would expect from an encounter that they are calling Ultimate. And think about the word Ultimate, guys. Like, Ultimate is supposed to signify that this is it. This is the hardest difficulty that we can throw at you. So we have to keep that in mind as we're talking about this. And I think they hit it right with the pacing. One big criticism that UCOB gets is that the fight duration was much, much, much too long. And we'll talk about that in a second. Svi, I see you there. Moobot's going crazy. I'm going to turn Moobot down because Moobot's going a little wild. But we don't need Moobot going so crazy. Just give me me 1 second. Let's do... Okay, so like we were saying before, the fight duration is something that people criticize UCOB for, probably most. UCOB is a 19 to 20 minute encounter. Let's call it 18 to 20 minute encounter, which was unprecedented before its release. We had, I think, I might get this wrong. This is gonna be embarrassing. I believe the longest encounter before UCOB. How long was Brute Justice? I want to say it was a little over 14. It was a little over 14 minutes. I don't think we had a 15-minute encounter. Man, I hope I don't get that wrong. Okay, I'm gonna say that the longest encounter before UCOB was a little over 14 minutes. I believe turn 13 was a little over 14 minutes, and I believe in the manipulator was a little over 14 minutes. I hope that's right. Manipulator might have actually been a little over 13 minutes. But turn 13 for sure was a little over 14 minutes. So we transitioned from that, which is what we previously know as the longest fight in the game, to an encounter that lasts upwards of 20 minutes. In an encounter that's already so much faster paced than everything else. That was a big shift for people. And we'll sort of go into why that might have been a little excessive, why maybe it was okay, but why some people would feel it's a bit excessive. I think that because of the way the fight unfolds, and if you guys are unfamiliar with UCOB, the way the fight unfolds is you start out with Twin, you kill Twin, then you fight Nail, you kill Nail, and it's only then that Bahamut first comes down. And Bahamut at this point goes through a series of, it's sort of like a gauntlet of mechanics. It's a gauntlet of dances, basically. And at the end of essentially 6 set of mechanical dances, you have to have gotten Bahamut to a certain percentage, and if you do, then you get to go to the second to last phase, which was a phase where Bahamut is channeling Terror Flare, and both Nail and Twin come down, and you have to fight both Nail and Twin at the same time while Bahamut is above them channeling Terror Flare. And your goal is to kill Nail and Twin before Bahamut finishes casting, and if you do that, then Phoenix comes down and Falcon punches Bahamut, and then Bahamut goes Super Saiyan, and you fight the Golden Bahamut that we referenced earlier. So all of that I just described, that's a 20-minute encounter, I think. And I think that because of the pacing of mechanics, a lot of the phases require you to not miss a beat, and having your players perform their dances and their dance steps perfectly for 20 minutes straight is very taxing. It's very hard to concentrate for that long on the movements you have to make, the decisions you have to make, all while keeping yourself alive. So it's very mentally fatiguing. And looking at the mechanics themselves over a timeline, I think they're all very manageable over a 20-minute period. Where people found issue is that when you're doing it for hours and hours and hours throughout the day, the duration sort of causes mental fatigue, and the more fatigued you get, the worse your play and consistency become. So it starts to snowball, and as it's snowballing, you sort of start regressing in progress, and it feels like you're not going anywhere. And that's what I think most people encountered when they were progressing, outside of the highest of echelon teams. For the average player, that's how their progression cycle went. And that's partly due to the fact that the fight is just so damn long. When you finally do get that pull where everyone's super focused and doesn't make many mistakes, when you finally get that pull where the stars align, only to get to, you're 16 and a half minutes in the fight, only to find out there's an entire entire new 3-minute phase to deal with, it's draining. There's no other word for it other than draining. You know, it felt like the finish line just kept moving an inch farther away from you. You know, it's like 1 step forward for you, 2 steps forward for the finish line. That's how it felt progressing through Ultimate. I'm somebody who doesn't mind that, just because you know, a never-ending fight, it's just never-ending fun. That's the best way I can describe it. You know, it's new challenges every phase. You know, if I could just live in UCOB Prague and do nothing but see new phases all day every day, I would do that. And I wouldn't do that. That sounds like nightmare. But Ayasa in chat is saying the biggest difference between Ultimate and Modern Savage is the developer willingness to include mechanics that need to be properly executed by every member of the group to avoid a wipe. 100% agree. In Savage modes, at least in the most recent iterations of Savage, you definitely don't need everyone entirely in sync at all times. Wipe recovery is a lot more prominent in Savage modes than it was in Ultimate. Ultimate really requires that all 8 players be dancing in sync at all times, and I think that's something that you don't find in Savage modes. I think it's something that was maybe a little bit more prominent back in sort of a Gordius style setting. You know, when you had Manipulator, for example. Well, even Manipulator. If you think about Manipulator, I was gonna reference the Nissi passing in the final phase of Manipulator, but even that's a phase where honestly your melee are just sitting there doing nothing. So even Manipulator, which before Ultimate was what was undeniably the hardest content the game had ever had, even that encounter did not require 8 people playing perfectly in sync for the entire duration of the fight. You know, in the hardest phase of Manipulator, you only needed 5 to 6 players performing perfectly, and you know the 2 to 3 other players didn't have, you know, they could afford a mistake here and there. So really, Unending Coil is sort of the first experience we've had with you know, environment to that level of extremity. But back to our initial topic of what was good about this and what was bad about this, I think the fight duration was definitely Ultimate. However, did it need to actually be that long to still be Ultimate? And that's one thing that we're going to talk about today. Did the fight have to be 20 minutes to be Ultimate? I'm going to make the argument to you guys that it did not. And I'll explain why. And I'll be really curious to see how what your guys' opinion is on this. One of the things that I think that Unending Coil could have improved on is the Bahamut phase itself. I actually think that the Twin phase and the Nail phase were done very well. I think that they paid proper homage to their previous iterations. I think that they were a difficulty level that I would expect of Ultimate. But when it came to Bahamut himself, and you sort of, when you reach Bahamut in the encounter, you really start to feel like, oh, this is when the fight begins. Finally, we're fighting Bahamut. Finally, we're in the Unending Coil of Bahamut. We're fighting Bahamut. And when the Bahamut phase is not even as fast-paced as the previous phase of Nail, I think that the Bahamut phase could have been improved. And this is the one thing that I will be critical about with Unending Coil. You guys, I've gone on record being, you know, having high praises for what they did with Unending Coil in the past. I've called it my favorite encounter in the game. But I do believe that this is one thing that I'm going to be critical about. Bahamut himself, which should be the main part of the encounter, was really kind of underwhelming. And he was underwhelming because while a few of the dances were mechanically intensive, like I would say, I'm going to say that I think 10 Strike Trio and Heaven's Fall Trio were definitely worthy of an Ultimate encounter. I think something like Blackfire Trio, and to a lesser extent Felruin, were probably something that should have been elevated a little bit higher. All while this is going on, all while you're going through these dances, there's a very, 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 very lenient DPS check that they expect players to make. By the end of all the trios and Grand Octet, which is the conclusion to the regular Bahamut phase, you just have to get Bahamut to 60%. And the reason that they only choose 60% is you have very limited uptime of Bahamut himself in the actual encounter. I don't know why Moobot is still going wild. I'm actually just gonna turn Moobot off, guys. I apologize for that. If you guys want to ask questions for the stream for the show later on, exclamation questions should be a command that'll work. So let me just turn Moobot spamming off. Okay. Because the actual uptime that you get on Bahamut is so limited throughout the trios and Grand Octet, they can't put a ridiculous DPS check requirement on that phase. When you lose uptime, what you do is you lose room for optimization, and that is sort of something that I'm going to be critical of. One area that I think that they could have made the fight more difficult, while maybe also retracting some of the length of the fight in order to compensate it. Imagine an encounter where Bahamut was attackable the entire time, throughout all these trios, through all these dances we're doing. What that allows players to do is it allows players to find room for DPS optimizations that you're going to expect talented players to be able to do. When you only give players 10 seconds here, 15 seconds here, there's really not a lot of what I like to call outplaying you can do. You can't really outplay the DPS check that way. You know, it's very linear. Bahamut appears for 15, 20 seconds. Okay, we pop whatever CDs we didn't have to use while he was up in the air, and we burst them. There's really nothing else going on there. You're not dodging. You're not balancing, doing a mechanic while maximizing your uptime, which is something that's typically separated average players from great players. There's no room or opportunity for that because of the way they've set up the Bahamut phase. And what you could have done is you could have reduced the duration of the trio cycles and allowed for more uptime on Bahamut. You know, he doesn't have to be there the whole time, but have him be there for at least over 90 seconds at a time, and allow us to balance doing mechanics while optimizing our DPS. What this does is it rewards good play, and it also adds another layer of difficulty to the fight that isn't really present in one of the most critical portions of the fight, in my opinion. I think that the Bahamut phase is one of the most critical portions of the fight, and I feel it's a little bit underwhelming. It's the one thing I'm going to be super critical about with UCOB. When you get past the Bahamut phase, once you get into 60% after Grand Octet and you enter the Terror Flare phase, I think the fight is fantastic. I think the Terror Flare phase is done very well. You know, the combination of mechanics from both Twin and Nail happening concurrently is extremely fun to do and fun to learn and progress through. But it again is it follows a phase of the fight that was really just, for all intents and purposes, long without much difficulty. And I don't know if that's too outlandish to say, but I don't think the trios necessarily are what the real difficulty of the fight is. You know, they're just dances, and when you learn the dance steps, you just do the dance. There's no maximizing of uptime you have to learn. There's no cooldown optimization that you have to learn, with the exception of your scholar and your tanks. You know, so I think there's room for improvement there. If you're going to raise the difficulty to another level through that, then definitely probably want to make the fight duration a little bit less. Cut out one of the trios entirely, or combine one of the trios. You know, we were talking about in progression that, or I guess it would be post progression, that you could honestly combine. I think it was Fell Ruin and Blackfire, and have a trio. Like, you could actually combine those, and they would stand alone as a trio themselves, and it would be completely in line with some of the other parts of the fight and some of the other difficulties of the fight. I think that that's definitely something that I would want to see. And you know, what's our takeaway from this? Our takeaway here is that portions of time where a boss is untargetable for long periods of time does not allow players to separate themselves, and when players are not able to separate themselves, the tuning of an encounter becomes very static. I don't know if static is the right word I want to use, but I'm blanking on the real word I want to use. The tuning of an encounter becomes very becomes more simplified. When a player can't outplay, quote-unquote, an encounter to maximize DPS, it's literally just have your players attack the boss. As long as they had 8 players alive the whole time, they make a DPS check. That's the tuning that goes into that. And Moobot will never be silenced. Yeah, Moobot's going wild, guys. I think part of the reason is I need to rejoin with Moobot. I did that earlier, but I don't think Moobot actually did. So it should be fine now. I apologize for that. Episode 0, guys. Bear with me. Still working some stuff out. Anyway, we've been critical a little bit of UCOB in regard to some of the things it could have done to maybe lessen the fight duration while also keeping the ultimate level of difficulty. Let's talk about some of the things the ultimate did well. We highlighted that we liked the pacing. We highlighted that, actually we didn't highlight this yet. This is something that I think the ultimate did really well. Aesthetically, thematically, and just the fact that it was Bahamut himself, they knocked it out of the park with the visuals of Ultimate. The new assets that they added in the last phase of the fight in Golden Bahamut, like I mentioned, nobody was really expecting, leading up to Prague, nobody was really expecting new assets. And experiencing them like that was breathtaking. I think that as far as boss phase transitions go, the transition when your party dies, Phoenix reses you, Falcon punches Bahamut, and then Bahamut goes Super Saiyan, that's one of the greatest phase transitions I've ever seen in an MMO. It ranks right up there with, well, I have a special place in my heart for the Brute Justice phase transition, but I think it ranks right up there with, I think probably the most popular phase transition has been Neo X Death, but the Golden Bahamut transition ranks right up there with Neo. I think that another thing that went pretty well, well, can I say that this went well? Okay, this is probably up for debate, guys. Yeah, because I'm now actually second guessing myself now that I think about it. I was gonna say what went well with Ultimate is it allowed for the inclusion of many different many different party compositions and different jobs into progression. But this is actually a topic in itself, and this is definitely something we should get into on the show today. When it comes to Ultimate, all of this is done at max level gear. There is no reward. It doesn't reward you higher eye level gear that you don't earn higher eye level gear from Twin and Nail, and then that helps you progress through the fight. What you have when you enter is what you have when you leave. And what that means is what you have when you enter is what the boss is tuned for. There's no extra gear that a job that doesn't perform as well as another job can get to be able to put themselves on an even playing field with some of the more, I don't want to say meta jobs, with some of the, because I don't really like the concept of meta, but some of the more higher performing jobs. What Square Enix chose to do for Ultimate was because there's no way for jobs that don't perform as well as others to level the playing field, they tuned the encounter to accommodate all jobs. It's very clear in their encounter design that they did not want to exclude any jobs. However, what this does is when you take a party composition that puts a large number of high-performing jobs together, it somewhat trivializes the DPS checks that are put in place that are supposed to be accommodating for all jobs. And I'm not too sure how I feel about that. I think saying it out loud, and this was my opinion going into it, I think that it probably is healthy for the game. I don't know, and I didn't always used to feel this way, but I don't know if you can say that a job should not be able to clear an encounter. I think maybe what should happen, and this is going to be my opinion on this, let's take a job like Samurai, which unfortunately is one of the, lowest contributors to... Okay, I'm just going to be honest. It's one of the lowest contributors to a raid success right now. I said it. I'm sorry, I said it. Okay, we got that out in the open. Take a job like a Samurai. In order for a Samurai to get a UCOB clear, is it not unfair to request that some of the more better performing jobs be present to pick up the Samurai's slack? If you take multiple Samurais and put them in an attempt to clear, the fight should not be clearable at that level, because what that does is it trivializes the checks so much for the people who are running the higher outputting jobs. And I don't think that UCOB did that. I think that UCOB did look for a balance in that regard. I maybe would have liked to see it be a little bit tighter. I think that when it comes to the Golden Bahamut phase, the fact that you can have a death as long as you die in like the second half of Golden, even a little bit, maybe not quite the second half, as long as you die in like the last 35 to 40% of the phase, you can still make the DPS check. If you die like right off the bat, it's probably possible, but it's going to be very difficult to make the DPS check. I can't say that I've ever done it with somebody dying right off the bat, to my knowledge. I might be wrong in that. Somebody in chat from my team might be able to correct me, but I don't think we've ever actually cleared when we've had somebody die right away. But definitely have clears when people die at like the halfway mark, for sure. So yeah, it's up for debate on what's actually good for Ultimate. I'm gonna rest my opinion at I'm okay with the fact that it's job inclusive, assuming that some of the lesser outputting jobs have some of the stronger jobs there to pick them up, to pick up the slack. I think that I'm okay with that. But you should be able to put a samurai, 2 samurais, a red mage, and a machinist in a party and expect a clear. I don't think that that's where I ever want to see the ultimate difficulty go. Yeah, and that's probably where I'll leave that debate at. I think that that's something that we could probably debate for the rest of the show, and I definitely want to move on to other topics. I've definitely seen it clear with the death of the first. I feel like I have as well. I feel like I've even been in one, but I can't remember. I would imagine that it's probably more so okay if it's a healer and they die at a time that still allows them to set up for Morniphaz. You can. It's pretty difficult if you're losing all the if it's a tank and the tank loses all of his DPS in the phase, because that's like a tank death is like that early on that's about 4,000 DPS lost, and unless all 4 of your DPS are doing over 11k in that phase, which is possible, I think it'd be difficult for all 4 considering one of them has to do the LBs. It's gonna be pretty difficult, but I think that with a healer death off the bat, you can probably still make the check. Healers are outputting anywhere from 3k to 4k plus in that phase, and losing your healer's DPS there, it's not unreasonable to think that your party can't make up the missing 3k. But we'll move on from that. I think we got that off our chest. So we've sort of talked about how UCOB unfolded. We've spent extensive time actually talking about it, maybe even a little bit too much time. But I think it's important to analyze, to look back at UCOB and decide what we liked about it, what we didn't necessarily like about it. I think most people are in agreement that 19 minutes is a little bit long when there was still areas of the fight that they could have made harder. That's my opinion, personally. I don't know how many people truly share that opinion, but that's the opinion that I have. Other than that, is the fight worthy of the ultimate name? Because we have no other thing to compare it to, and because we're working in the constraints of they want to not exclude any jobs from it, I'm going to say yes, it was worthy of the ultimate name. I don't feel that that's unfair to say. But let's look ahead now to what they've just announced. Not even 2 weeks ago, I think maybe a week and a half at this point, we've got word of what the next ultimate encounter is going to be. And it's going to be none other than the beast on your screen right now, Ultimate Weapon. And right out of the gate, guys, I want to know, do we think that they picked the right boss for the next ultimate fight? I will tell you, my opinion is, hell yes. If you're gonna follow up Bahamut fucking Prime with anything in the game, it's gotta be Ultimate Weapon. The reason why Ultimate Weapon was such a great pick is there's so much that they can do with this. There's so much they can do with this encounter, and I'm gonna get really excited about this. There's so much they can do with this encounter. Ultimate Weapon is he's like 6 to 7 encounters waiting to happen, all combined in one. In addition to all that, just like you guys in chat are alluding to, Ultimate Weapon is another iconic, classic enemy to the Final Fantasy franchise. And if we're going to make bosses that are supposed to stand the test of time as iconic and, Final Fantasy rating history defining, they better be iconic members of Final Fantasy franchise. They better not be a giant Sabatender. They better not be a giant Kraken. I want to see Bahamuts. I want to see Ultimate Weapons. I want to see Atomoses. I want to see stuff that's really iconic to the Final Fantasy franchise. And I think that they definitely chose well. And they chose well not just because of the theme and thematics. They chose well because, like I alluded to earlier, this is an encounter that's literally 6 to 7 plus encounters in one, depending on how they want to go. And this, most of the rest of the show today is going to be speculation, but I'm going to have a lot of fun with it. So you guys are going to just have to bear with me. Because of the nature of Ultimate Weapon being able to absorb primals, that opens up the possibility for so many concurrent mechanics that can happen. The range of phases that can happen during the Ultimate Weapon phase of the encounter is massive. We can have the trio system as we did in Bahamut, potentially with Ultimate Weapon, being targetable the whole time, and us maneuvering around these mechanics happening around us because of the fact that he absorbs primals and then unleashes the primals' power on your party. Now, the thing about these encounters is all of these things, if you guys are familiar with like the Savage modes and the Extreme modes and the Ultimate mode that they released in 4.1, all these things come from the Wandering Minstrel. The Wandering Minstrel's, his memories, he's got a little bit of a fuzzy memory sometimes. And what these are supposed to be ballads that he recalls and he retells the tale of that has been passed down through extensive games of phone tag over the years. His memory's gotten a little hazy over the years. it's not without possibility that the ultimate weapon that we encounter in 4.3 could have way more primals than the ultimate weapon that we're used to. It could go well beyond Ifrit, Titan, and Garuda. We could see Leviathans, we could see Ramu mechanics, we could see Shiva mechanics, he could go hog wild and pull stuff from Heaven's Ward. We could see Ravana mechanics. You know, there's just so much that Ultimate Weapon can pull from, because this is just a tale of a mechanical, of an ancient technology that absorbs the power of primals. And I think that the way that they can take this encounter is very interesting and appealing to me. In addition to all of that, if that wasn't enough, Ultimate Weapon, in terms of where it stands in Final Fantasy XIV lore, Ultimate Weapon, I believe, oh man, I hope I don't get this wrong, I believe it was controlled by the Empire at the end of Rome Reborn. So you can also tie the Empire to this encounter, and have their own separate Empire specific phases. We could see a return of Gaius. We could see, what's the name of that Ascian? La Habrea, I think was his name. There's so many different things that can happen with this encounter. If they were going to follow up to Bahamut Prime and keep things true to the Ultimate namesake, you know, we know the Ultimate requires fast pacing, a long fight duration, and just a ton of mechanics happening concurrently. This is where they should have went. You know, a lot of people were saying, I want Titan Ultimate. I look at the Titan boss guys. There's not enough Titan mechanics they can make to make an encounter actually ultimate. Ultimate really requires a ton of mechanics happening at the same time over a long period of time. And do you guys really want to be doing the same landslide dance, landslide jail, tumult dance? Do you guys really want to be doing that for 18 minutes? I personally don't. I want to see different mechanics as we phase through the fight in different phases, and I want to see a bunch of them happening at the same time, which requires we need a ton of mechanics in the mechanic pool. So Ultimate Weapon was my pick from the very beginning when they first announced that they were going to do a 4.3 Ultimate. It's the only thing that really made sense to me, because it's the only thing that has a large enough mechanic pool to design an Ultimate encounter around from. And I think after this patch, I'm actually pretty curious where they're going to go. I'm not sure where they're going to go for 4.5, assuming there's going to be an Ultimate 4.5. Because Bahamut, between the coils and Ultimate Weapon, in my mind, in order to maintain the conditions that I just described for an Ultimate encounter, the list of encounters they're able to do that start to shrink. And it may just be that we need to start combining encounters again to do it. Maybe they do an Alexander medley similar to how they did the Coil medley. I think one of the most popular, somebody in the chat just mentioned as well, I think one of the most popular assumptions is that we may see a Thornton Ultimate in 4.5. But you know, that is getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Let's just keep it, I guess, focused on what we do know, and we do know that Ultimate Weapon Badassery is going to happen in a little bit over a month at this point, about a month and a half from now. So I'm excited. I hope you guys are excited. What do we want to see in Ultimate? Well, what do we know about Ultimate Weapon's mechanics? We know that he has phases where he incorporates Ifrit mechanics. He has a phase where he incorporates Titan mechanics. He has one for Garuda mechanics. Concurrent with all these things happening, you know, he's doing a stacking tank buster on your main tank. He has a cleave that he does, and then in the environment around the room, I guess I shouldn't say the environment, but things around the room incorporate themselves in the fight. You know, you have little bits spawning around the fight. You have ships crashing into the damn arena. I think that it's not going to take much for them to amp this difficulty up. I want to see a lot of primals. I want to see more than just Titan, Ifrit, and Garuda. I want to see a boss, like I mentioned earlier, I want to see a boss that is attackable for long periods of times, because I think that rewards DPS optimization, and I think that rewards players who are very talented at that. I think it's something that separates an average player from a great player. I want to see Square Enix design the fight in a manner that forces us to have to balance doing 3 to 4 mechanics at once while also optimizing uptime. So that's what I'm looking for. What are some of the things you guys are looking for? The lasers are going to be fun. So yeah, we have the bits spawning around the room, shooting lasers, covering up some of the safe spots in the room. I'm sure that's gonna take place in the fight. You know, we're going to be dodging Ifrit dives while the bits are closing off our safe zone. It's going to be, I guarantee you something like that is going to happen. We're going to have, it's the timing of events happening is what's going to make it difficult. I'm sure there's going to be portions of the fight where Titan's doing his ultimate attack, where he comes down and it's not his ultimate attack, but you know, it comes down and Titan does proximity damage. Oh, but you got ships coming on the edges of the arena and they're doing proximity damage. So you know, having to balance the Titan proximity damage versus the ship's proximity damage. There's going to be tons of stuff like that. I'm really looking forward to it. ISSA and Praetorium, he destroys the entire Imperial facility with Ultima as well. That is true. Yeah, that is true. I had actually completely forgotten about that. That's a good point. In the story mode of Ultima, he starts out in the facility. He's not in the the war-torn wasteland that you encounter him when you do him in the hard mode version. And I believe in that fight in the story, there's you have a Heidelin cameo. So we could see a lot of potential for how the theme of the fight is going to go. I think if they're going to make something ultimate, it's going to be, like we mentioned earlier, the quality of the product is very important to Square Enix, and I think that they're really going to want to make Ultimate look epic and be mesmerizing to an onlooker. And you know, incorporating something as massive as Heidelin into the fight could be, you know, for lack of a better word, epic. So I think that's definitely something that we could see, and that would be a really awesome addition to the encounter. So that it's not just the stale, you know, we zone in, ultimate weapons in front of us, we pull them, and that's it. So I think that's definitely something I'm looking forward to. Let me just take a sip of my coffee here. So was Ultimate Weapon a good pick? I think Ultimate Weapon was a good pick, personally. I think time will tell. It's worth noting that Ultimate Weapon is going to be designed by a different developer than Unending Coil was. We did have Pseudo, who's well-renowned for making fantastic encounters, design Unending Coil. And I don't remember off the top of my head if it was even mentioned who's going to be designing Ultimate Weapon. So I think that that's probably the only worrisome portion right now. I hope that it stays true to what made Unending Coil feel ultimate. I would imagine that the designer of Ultimate Weapon knows what made Unending Coil actually ultimate, but I also know that they received a ton of negative feedback about things like the fight's duration and the punishment factor. I think that I'm a little bit concerned about the number of complaints from the player base toward how punishing Unending Coil was, because I really don't want them to I don't want to see them make the fight any less punishing. I think one of the things that did separate the encounter from any other encounter they'd previously released was just how punishing it actually was. And I hope that they stay true to that. I remember hearing Pseudo isn't making this one. I'm hoping Mr. Ozma's behind Uwu, because he's the only other one I trust to do it justice. We'll have to wait and see. I don't believe it's been announced. If it has, somebody in chat can correct me. I don't believe it's been announced who the designer is. But you know, I will. That's definitely going to be a key thing to look out for. So are you guys in the chat? When we look at how Unending Coil behaved, it really rewarded and catered to players who can be playing all day. The world progression teams literally going 16 hours a day. I think for the mid-core audience, it was probably a very taxing experience. I'd be curious to know how many of you guys watching are excited to try Ultimate Weapon Ultimate. I know a large portion of you are not going to be doing 16 hours a day, but is this still something that you're going to be really interested in trying? And I think Square Enix is probably going to be very interested in your answer as well. You know, even if it's sort of a carrot on the end of the... For some groups, it's a carrot on the end of a stick that isn't reachable for many months, just because the amount of time they can put forth to it is too minimal. I'd be curious to know how many people are actually looking forward to trying it versus how many people are just looking forward to watching it as an onlooker. I want a more consistent timeline of mechanic intensive phases in a shorter duration for this encounter. So basically what you're saying is you want sort of what I was describing earlier with Bahamut, maybe combine some of those trios and make Bahamut attackable to make them crazy and also reduce the fight's duration that way. I don't disagree. I think that probably would be one of the greatest things they could have done to Unending Coil. I'm excited to go at it. Ooh over Ubu. Okay. I'm glad I'm going hardcore this patch. This is probably one of the ultimate patches are always great times to, you know, if you're like me and have trouble affording time to be hardcore for every single content cycle they put out. If you're gonna go hardcore for a patch, I would personally do the ultimate patches. I think that they're at least, well, with my sample size of 1, I think the Unending Coil was extremely fun to progress through. And I still, even my criticisms of regular Bahamut Prime in the encounter, I still think it's one of my more enjoyed times progressing through a fight. So yeah, I would encourage anybody who wants to put forth the time to definitely do it, because it's a lot of fun. Super casual raid group, but we still want to see what we can learn from it. That's actually a really cool mindset to go into it with. So I, you know, hats off to you guys, and I definitely encourage you to do so. All capitals, Moon. All capitals. So I think at this point, everything after this is sort of speculation, right? If it wasn't going to be Ultimate Weapon, we would have wanted to be Thornton. We know that we want to see a ton of primals incorporated in the fight. We know that we want to see some maybe Garlean influence in the earlier phases. And if they want to make the fight feel epic, we've definitely got to get some Heidelin inclusion. You know, sort of as an homage to the story mode, just like they incorporated the Phoenix theme, not theme, but the Phoenix lore into the Bahamut encounter. Thoughts on Golden / Exaflare? If you're asking for my opinion on the mechanic Exaflare itself, I think that. Okay, this is actually probably an interesting topic that I probably should have highlighted earlier, but we'll get into it now real quick. One thing I do want to do is I want to make time for, time's actually getting kind of away from me, but I want to make time for some viewer questions at the end of the show, because I've been talking my ass off for the last hour and 15 minutes. But one thing I do want to talk about that I didn't get to is we didn't really go into the actual ultimate specific phase in Golden Bahamut. We didn't really go into what actually transpired there and how did it perform. We lightly touched on the fact that the DPS check could have been probably a little bit higher, but we know that that's a result of they want to make it job inclusive instead of job exclusive. So I think maybe a DPS check slightly a tad bit higher so that you can't afford deaths. But mechanically, I think that they're probably, and This is a result of the fact that the actual Bahamut phase himself was too long. The golden phase should have had more, but you can't make a 22-minute encounter. I mean, you could. I guess you shouldn't say you can't, but you probably shouldn't make a 22-minute encounter. And that's really what they needed to do if they wanted to make golden be the penultimate phase in the encounter, because in my opinion, and a lot of groups' opinions, once you make it through Terror Flare, which is the ad phase of Nail and Twin, once you make it through that, as long as you understand how Extra Flare works, the fight is dead. There are many different strategies for making Extra Flare trivial, and if you make Extra Flare trivial, the fight is dead. You do have Mornifaw, which at first encounter, it's overwhelming. Mornifaw is probably the hardest hitting attack in the game. But as far as mechanical intensity goes, they could have done more with Exit Flare. I think that Exit Flare probably should have required you to be able to play the middle of the map. I think the mechanic is a lot more difficult to manage when you're in the middle of the map. I tell every group that's still progressing, or not still progressing, or yeah, still progressing. I tell every group that's progressing on Exit Flare these days, do your Exit Flares on the wall if you're progressing. It is so much easier. It eliminates so much room for error. It is completely unnecessary to do it in the middle of the map. A lot of people will make the argument that you gain higher DPS in the middle of the map. I disagree. I actually will sit here and argue that the Lucrezia method is the highest DPS method of all. And you know, we can debate that on another. We can debate that on stream at a different time. But I feel like if they wanted to make Exit Flare truly difficult, force your players to do it in the middle of the map and reduce the ability to find. What do we want to do? Potentially, one thing I think they could have done is they could have always made a 3-to-1 dodge possible, and make a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-2 impossible, so that the entire purpose of the mechanic is to find the safe zone and find it while these explosions are coming at you, stressing you out. I think that would have been a better mechanic, personally. I think it puts a lot more stress on your team. It reminds me a lot, if you guys are familiar with World of Warcraft Legion, it reminds me a lot of the final phase of Kil'jaeden on Mythic. And it also reminds me a little bit of the Brute Justice Savage Only phase with the Chakrams at the end. Finding the safe spot in a high stress environment is a bit more difficult than you might expect. And I think that probably would have been a really cool way to take Exit Flare, because what Exit Flare ended up devolving into is nothing more than either running alongside the wall to solve it, or running straight into it if you're doing the strategy that Lucrezia came up with, which, as I mentioned earlier, I think is the best strategy of all. And I'm somebody who argued for doing it in the middle in progression, saying that. So, somebody asked what was my opinion on Golden / Exit Flare. That was my opinion. I think I would have liked to see a little bit more to the Golden phase, possibly the addition of an entirely separate mechanic. I think a fourth mechanic might have been necessary to make Golden truly feel like the final phase of the encounter, because as it stands right now, it's a trivial DPS check with mechanics that are essentially cheesed by using the spawns on the side of the wall. And Mornifaw is nothing other than a cooldown rotation, and same with Ockmorns. It's something that a spreadsheet literally solves by itself. So that's my feelings on Golden and the final phase there. Do I want to see a phase similar to Golden in Ultimate Weapon? Please, yes. I really, really, really hope that they match the level of surprise that they did with Bahamut Prime, with Bahamut Ultimate. I hope that we see something in Ultimate Weapon Ultimate that completely surprises us and we don't expect, and is a Ultimate only phase, because I think that if they're gonna do that for Bahamut, they gotta do it for everything else. Otherwise, everything afterwards is gonna be a letdown. So that's my feelings in the matter. We're about an hour and 20 minutes into the show right now. I've been rapid firing going through this, guys. I apologize if I've missed any of your important comments. So at this point, what I want to do is I want to open up the floor a little bit to some questions you guys have asked. Moobot's been spamming my link to the Curious Cat question list, and what I'm going to do for the remainder of the show today is I'm going to go through it and pick out some of my favorites that I think would make for good discussion topics, and we'll finish out today with that. If you guys have any questions that you haven't already asked, you can feel to just at me in the chat right now, and anything really raid related or ultimate related is definitely something that I'm interested in right now. So one question I saw right off the bat is where was it? So here's one that we've kind of already touched on a little bit. They're asking, what are your feelings on fight tuning in Stormblood purely in a numerical sense? I remember you saying A8 Savage is some of the best tuning you had seen in a fight, and I'm curious how recent fights hold up. Well, we sort of touched on that with UCOB. I think my response to this will probably just be a little bit more detailed of an answer in... I've mentioned that I want to see fights that are tuned for DPS optimization over long periods of uptime. I know the reason that they had to tune UCOB the way they did. It's because there was a lack of uptime in the Bahamut phase, and in the Golden phase they didn't want to exclude jobs. I want to see them tune... I want to see them first off, be able to tune an encounter higher, and the only way they're able to tune an encounter higher is if they give players more uptime. That is the only way they're going to be able to tune and encounter higher. I feel fights like Brute Justice's Savage Only phase, with Wing Justice, as we used to call him back in the day, fantastic example of what to do. If they're going to pick an encounter to decide how to tune a boss on, please, 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 please reference Brute Justice. Wing Justice, which is the final phase of Brute Justice Savage, gave you full uptime from start to finish, while also forcing you to interact with all the mechanics not only that he's doing, but the map is doing as well. And that, to me, gave them complete freedom of tuning, and they can tune it to as high of a level as they want. And I hope that they recognize that going forward, and I hope that they recognize where they maybe fell a little bit short in UCOM. I think this is another great question here. I know you're more in the hardcore / world prog scene in raiding, but do you have any advice for the more casual / mid-core raiders who may want to try Ultimate? I do. I don't think that it's something that people shouldn't try. However, I'm going to be realistic in my response. A team that is only putting forth 8 to 10 hours a week into Ultimate, at least with our sample size of 1 in UCOB, a team that's only putting forth 10 to 12 hours in UCOB a week is going to have a very miserable time progressing through it. And I shouldn't say progressing through it, it's going to have a very difficult time chasing a kill. What I would recommend to a more mid-core static that can't make more hardcore hours is to get in there as much as you can, and when you feel like you have the fight understood and completely mapped out, and you're wanting to chase a kill, take your static, take a Saturday, just put forth one or 2 days of really long raid days. Do like a 10 to 12 hour Saturday and just try to finish the fight. It's very difficult to zone in there, and you only have 3 to 4 hours to try and chase a kill, and then you're maybe taking a couple days off. People are at work and school, and then you go back in there and you're a little bit rusty, so you're trying to shake the rust off that initial hour, and it's gonna take you so much longer than just set aside a Saturday, put aside some responsibilities that Saturday, and just put forth 10 hours in that Saturday and just try to bang it out and finish it. And if you don't get it that Saturday, try again the next Saturday. I think that for a mid-core static, that's probably the best thing to do. You can have your more casual hours while learning and while progressing, but once you're ready to chase a kill, I really feel like you gotta just put aside a day and just go at it for that whole day. That would be my recommendation to somebody approaching Ultimate a little bit more mid-core. We talked about this already. You often mentioned the lack of DPS checks in recent content as a negative. Would UCOB really have been better if each phase had DPS checks as strict as A4 Savage Third Leg or A3 Savage Hand of Pain? With a fight like that, adding DPS onto the already heaping pile of consistency checks seems like it would be a polarizing choice. I don't disagree. However, if they want to live up to the name of Ultimate, the one thing that Ultimate did not test is a player's ability to maximize DPS while also dealing with mechanics. I think the two phases that test that are the nail phase, and the nail phase didn't do a very good job of it. I think the nail phase was tuned way too low for to reach this. But the one phase I think that does a very good job of it is the Terraflare phase. The Terraflare phase is probably the best tuning they have of a phase in that fight. Maybe, and I would actually put Twin Tanya as the second best tuning of a phase in that fight. I think I would rank it Terraflare phase, then Twin Tanya, then Golden, then Nail, then Bahamut Prime. I think in terms of how I rank the tunings of each phase, that would be where I go. Like we've already mentioned, I think that DPS checks are an important part of making an encounter difficult and testing a player's skill, because it tests a player's ability to maximize DPS and maximize uptime while dealing with mechanics around them. So if it was a little bit too polarizing that way, like we mentioned earlier, let's just reduce the fight duration and maybe combine some of the mechanics together to maybe sort of remove some of that fatigue and consistency issues. I need to drink more coffee, guys. What qualities make a raider more suited for Ultimate compared to any content before it? Again, we touched on the key thing that separates an average player from a great player is a great player is able to maximize output while dealing with mechanical difficulty. That's to me, that is what defines a great player in MMOs. Haven't played Final Fantasy XIV in a bit. How do you feel they have done on class balancing, as do you think it's punishing to bring certain classes because of meta classes? Well, I think that UCOB is probably the counter-argument to that, because UCOB is designed in a way that really any class can clear it given the right surrounding classes. If you put a samurai, as long as they're surrounded with a ninja, and at the time a summoner, and a warrior, you could do Dark Knight samurai, but as long as you surround them with the right help, any class could have cleared UCOB. We saw every single class was represented in UCOB clears. I should mention that we had every single class clear UCOB, and I think we give Square Enix a thumbs up for that. They did a good job in that, so props to them for that. I won't be too critical of should they have made it a little bit tighter. I won't be too critical. I think that it was probably okay. The only thing that I'll be critical about is the tuning of Golden, like we mentioned earlier. So in terms of overall class balance, there are definitely glaring issues between certain jobs right now. They have announced that in 4.3 we're going to see some job adjustments for those underrepresented classes. Specifically, Samurai, Dark Knight, and Astro are going to see adjustments. So jury's really out on what the class balance is going to shape up to be. Time will tell. It's like bursting out of me right now, guys. I really want to get into Dark Knight, but I actually have a show where I'm going to touch on that later, so I'm going to bite my tongue for now. But I think that some of the class balance issues right now, while they exist, are not as much of an issue as they're touted to be. I think the one class that's really suffering the most in the game right now is Samurai, and I'm very curious to see what happens in 4.3 when it comes to Samurai. So we'll leave the jury out on that one. Let's see. There's a couple other good questions here. Ooh, I like this question. Do you think take damage taken was enough in UCOB, or could they up it a bit? That's a great question. So tank damage itself was actually pretty great. I think if there's any tanks listening in the chat right now, I think they did pretty well with the tank damage received in the fight. The one part, here lies the issue. Because some of the DPS checks were so lenient in portions of the fight, your tanks could really afford to sit large amounts of tank stance. Sorry, your tanks could afford large amounts of tank stance uptime, and some of the damage taken was trivialized a little bit, but because of that. If the DPS check was a little bit harder in certain areas of the fight, and your tanks were forced more Sword Oath, more Gritless, more Deliverance, I think it probably would have been a good reference for what tank damage should be in Ultimate. I think Awkmorn is what a tank buster should feel like, what a final phase tank buster should feel like. I think the Awkmorns did a great job. Awkmorn really sort of added stock to the Paladin train as if there wasn't enough stock in the Paladin train already. So, we'll have to see what happens in 4.3 regarding Dark Knight in that regard. But Dark Knight was also a strong Awkmorn tank. Actually, Dark Knight was probably better than Warrior at Awkmorn. I don't even think probably. It definitely was better than Warrior at Awkmorn. There's actually no debating that. But when I look at the Golden Phase and tank damage in the Golden Phase, I see Paladin as a staple, and it'll be interesting to see if that remains the case going forward. Currently, I believe Paladin is a staple in that fight. You can clear without one for sure, but my question to you is, why? Another great question here. Stormblood has seen a Doorman/Faust phase before both end-tier bosses. Do you think this is a standard going forward, and is it a good way to enhance the final boss? So it seems like this is referencing the Savage modes more so than the Ultimate modes. I'm going to be critical, unfortunately. I think it's really stale. I'm going to be honest. I loved the Kefka atmosphere and the mechanics in the fight, but the formula for Stormblood Savage has already grown stale. To me. It's already grown stale on me. We have arenas. It's essentially just a gauntlet of 3 bosses, and then a mini-boss, and then a final boss. I want to see something that breaks the mold a little bit. So, do I think it's a good way going? Do I think it's a good option? Sure, I think mini-bosses into a final boss are fine. Do I want to see them every time? No. I want to see something that breaks the mold a little bit. Aquaman put the fear back in you just like in turn 13. Yeah, I agree. I think UCOB did tank damage justice. Another great point in chat. IS is saying that not a fan of checkpoints. I agree, and this is something that we didn't talk about earlier. Checkpoints are something I never want to see in Ultimate. Ever. I hope the developer is listening to me right now. He doesn't speak my language, most likely. However, oh, maybe he does. I shouldn't say that. I certainly don't speak his language. I'll say that. I really hope that we never see checkpoints in Ultimate. Ever. I don't like it because Gobkefka is like, what, 10 minutes and 30 seconds now? It's just too short. Yeah. So what's happening there is, because of the checkpoint system, it's taking away potential for the encounter that comes after the mini boss. And I've said this, I've gone on record saying this multiple times, but I'm going to say it here for you guys. My opinion is that in the development cycle for X-Death, I assume that X-Death was originally one encounter where the mini boss X-Death and the Neo X-Death were the same encounter, but they felt that at some point it was too difficult for Savage, and they broke it up into 2 parts. I want to believe that the first half of the encounter was the X-Death, mini boss X-Death, up to 60%, and the remaining 60% to 0% was Neo X-Death, with the final part of the fight being Final Battle. I think the fact that you have Final Battle into a repeat of the fight is odd, and I feel like they split the fight up with a checkpoint, and they were like, oh god, our final boss is now missing 5 minutes of encounter time. Just flip it all around and do it all over again. Repeat it from the start. I have a feeling that's how development cycle went, and I think it's a little silly. Like, if you just look at how XDeath proceeds, it kind of makes sense that the fight should end with final battle. The fact that it just goes into a repeat from 50 to 0, we really only got half of a boss. So, yeah, that's my opinion. That's my crackpot theory. I have a lot of great questions, but they're very. A lot of them are. Some of them are asking the same thing. So if I don't answer your question, it's mostly because it's essentially a duplicate. Compare/contrast UCOB with Legion Mythic level rating. I don't want to make this too much of a WoW show, so I will answer this very briefly. I've rated every single boss in Legion on Mythic difficulty. I've cleared every single one, and I felt that UCOB was more difficult than anything in Legion. I did not do Kill Jaden or any final end boss, Argus, Gul'dan. I did not do any of them at a world first eye level. However, I did them at a low enough eye level to where I feel that what we did in UCOB was more difficult, and that's most of my opinion stems from the fact that the pacing of UCOB is unrivaled compared to other fights in other MMOs. I've never seen an encounter where the pacing of mechanics is as fast as UCOB, and that's I guess all I'll really say on the matter. So I'm probably gonna try to wrap up here, guys, in about a little under 10 minutes. So I'm gonna be trying to squeeze in as many questions as I can before then. I want to say to all of you here now, before I take these last couple questions, because I did say that I wanted to keep this under 2 hours, and we're going on an hour 40 here. I really appreciate the involvement in chat you guys have shown throughout this episode. This is my first time doing this. It was very rocky. I apologize. I hope that we touched on as much as you guys wanted to hear when it came to Ultimate, and if I didn't, then you guys ask questions right now. I think that going forward, this is definitely something I really enjoyed doing, and I definitely want to continue doing more episodes. They won't always be Ultimate related, but my goal for the show is to always keep it rating focused, because that is primarily what my focus is in this game, and it's rating. So I hope to be able to do this as often as I can. Right now I plan for this to be a bi-weekly thing, and possibly in the future, if my brain allows for it, and also school, because I'm in school right now, maybe move it down to a weekly thing. But for now, it'll be a bi-weekly show. So yeah, thank you again, guys, for showing up today and going through this with me. Do I already have a topic for the next show so that people can gather questions? I do, and this is this is the one thing I regretted about not having more time between the announcement and my first show here, is I want to give you guys about a week in advance to be able to send in questions so that I can pick them in advance and go through them, without having to sort through them in the middle of the show. So what I'm going to do is I'll announce the topic for you guys after the show, and about a week in advance, I'll link sort of not a questionnaire, but a form that you guys can submit questions to me on, and we'll follow kind of the same formula, just maybe with some of the audio kinks sorted better, and maybe just be a bit more organized next time, because I learned some things from doing this one. Alright, so I'm going to pick a few more questions here, guys, and then I'm going to wrap up. Am I going to be participating in Ultimate, and will I be streaming it? I am going to be participating in Ultimate Prague. However, I will not be streaming it. I think that there are many groups who are streaming it, though. So I know that the Twitch environment for UCOB was fantastic. The amount of hype and support that the teams who were doing UCOB got while streaming was awesome to see. And I think that it definitely shows what people want and are interested in watching. So I expect the same level of hype to go into Ultimate Weapon on Twitch. I'm sure we'll. I don't know if I know that Hiroro's stream was really popular for the last one. I'm not sure if he'll be doing another stream. I would imagine he would, but yeah. Do we have a heads up on what the next episode's topic will be? Yes, I'll let you guys know after this. I'm gonna look for one more question, guys. I'm gonna try to make it a really good one. Okay, I think this one's a pretty good one. Says, what's your favorite kind of challenge in a raid? Is it working out what a mechanic even wants you to do, as in Gavel, optimizing to beat a gear check as low as possible, like A4S? And what is your favorite example of that kind of challenge? So me personally, my favorite kind of challenge is an environment, and I guess I've sort of beat this as a dead horse, but it's an environment where I'm forced to have to juggle mechanics that are new to me while also caring about my uptime. And I think, like I lightly touched on it earlier, I think the only encounter to truly do a perfect job of that has been Brute Justice. Brute Justice to me is still the premier example of how to do an encounter right, with the exception of one sort of massive issue in the final phase where a stack strat was possible. But if you remove that, Brute Justice is the premier example of how to do an encounter right. And if I had things my way, every single encounter would be a mirror of Brute Justice. Because I think it's with just reskin. Because I think it's great. So yeah, I think that's probably how I would summarize that. In my opinion, A3 is better on that than Brute Justice. The issue I had with A3 is that mechanically speaking, A3 was not as intensive mechanically as Brute Justice was. I think that the A3 mechanics were fairly simple to solve, but the DPS check was skewed so much. It was tuned so tight that what really was the roadblock with A3 was doing perfect numbers while juggling the mechanics. Whereas what I'm arguing is I would like to see encounters that require you to maximize your uptime while learning hard to solve mechanics. So maximizing your uptime while navigating, I shouldn't say hard to solve, hard to execute mechanics. Maximizing your uptime while executing a water dance in Wing Justice, while executing Gavel. Maximize your uptimes while executing hard to execute mechanics. That's where I stand. So I think with that, guys, we're going to wrap up today's show. We've been going for an hour and 45 minutes, and I did say I want to keep this under 2 hours. I'm really looking forward to what they do with Ultimate Weapon. I hope you guys are too. I really, really, really hope that it goes as well as UCOP did, and I want to see it even go better. And as always, guys, I want to say thank you for working through this with me and sitting here and listening to me talk some really nerdy stuff for a little under 2 hours. But all things must come to an end, and with that, I say, get out of here. It's been a pleasure, guys. My next show, like I said, is going to be in 2 weeks. I do primarily focus on tanking in this game, so some of my shows are going to be a bit tanking focused. And next show specifically is going to be one that I've been wanting to work on, and actually have already worked on in the recent month, but I haven't been able to upload it. It's going to focus on Stormblood tanking, and some of the topics in it are going to be how to approach tanking in a progression setting and a non-progression setting, and the differences between Stormblood tanking and Realm Reborn and Heavensward, because there are stark differences. Woo! That was a long show, guys. First time I've done a solo podcast like that. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please, 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 any feedback, negative or positive, let me know, because I want to. This is the pilot episode. This is where I'm supposed to learn how to do this stuff. I really had no idea how to do any of this going into it, but I want to make episode 1 as high quality as I can. My next episode will be true episode 1, and I want to take as much feedback as I can about this. Audio issues aside, the audio issue is the obvious one. I will get a working sound card before then. So any feedback, please leave me on Twitter or in a private message, and let's just work on making the next episode even better. Thank you guys for showing up. It was a lot of fun. I love seeing the reoccurring names in the chat that I see all the time. The Final Fantasy community has been something that has been a pleasure to be a part of over the years. I feel like it's a large community, but not so large that we can't all associate with one another. So that's been really enjoyable. Until next time, guys, I'm signing off. Peace. Have a good night. Enjoy Ultimate.